The night had fallen like a heavy blanket over the world, but few noticed account of the subtle change that floated in the air. In an old cathedral forgotten by the time, a single candle trembled in the altar, its flame dancing between life and death. Death. Outside, the wind whispered among the stones, as if trying to warn us of something that our modern arrogance prevented us here. Have you ever felt that the entire universe contained the breathing? That feeling of dense, foreboding silence imminent was there for whom knew perceive it. However, the most I walked through the illuminated streets, absorbed in screens bright, ignoring the ancient signs that silently began to manifest. The elders of remote villages, those who still they remembered the ancient traditions, they spoke in a low voice about the third evening dark, a forgotten legend that promised chaos when the world will trust more his own power. In remote monasteries, some monks they saw the unusual behavior of the stars as warnings written in Darling Same, but their voices were lost among the algorithms of the 21st century. And yet there was small flashes of awareness, clocks that stopped inexplicably, animals that were abandoned the fields, disturbing dreams that visited people who had never had faith. They were whispers of a monumental change, a crack in her tissue of the reality that no one wanted to accept until it was too late. Today, the ancient bells they have sounded alone again, the old people books open again, and the shadows have reclaimed their place among us. Because what happened tonight in Europe, the death of a spiritual leader, the fall of the light, was not coincidence. It was fulfillment of a warning that we prefer to ignore, a warning written not in ink, but in blood and darkness. The darkness arrive without prior notice, such as an ocean of ink spilling over cities whole. At first, it was just a blinking of the lights, a subtle vibration in the ground. But in a matter of minutes, all of Europe was engulfed in a terrifying electric silence. There were no lanterns, there was no screens, there was no music, just the distant sound of the wind, and in the distance, the metallic echo of doors slammed by the current. The great capitals, proud of their technological progress, surrendered to the fragility that no one wanted to admit. Paris, London, Berlin, all of them wrapped in an oppressive gloom, where every shadow seemed whisper ancient forgotten fears. The communications collapsed. Hospitals, deprived of their vital energy, they fought desperately to keep the most vulnerable alive. The train stations, packed with travelers trapped, they were transformed in vast caverns of anxiety and bewilderment. And meanwhile, in the houses, the cold began to penetrate the bones, reminding us that the civilization without electricity was little more than an illusion. In the midst of this chaos arose a primitive fear, one that modern generations had never really faced, the fear of the eternal night, a fear that could not be appeased with rationality, neither with technology, because it emanated from the depths of the human soul. But the most disturbing thing was not the lack of light, was the feeling that something much bigger than a simple blackout had just begun. And while Europe was trying to grasp it incomprehensible, a news leaked through the emergency radios, igniting a spark of terror even elderly in the hearts already weakened. The leader of the church there was dead. At that moment, we understood that we were witnessing not only an electrical failure, but the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy. The news crossed the continents as a mournful whisper, faster than any radio wave, deeper than any human scream. The Pope has dead. A short, brutal, definitive phrase. There was no grand ceremonies nor processions solemn, only the shudder collective of millions who, since the darkness of their homes, they tried to grasp the scope of that loss. In half from the electrical chaos, the death of the supreme spiritual leader resonated like the final ringing of a forgotten bell. Some they say he died in his private residence while recited the evening prayers right in the moment when the light was extinguished for the last time. Others, they murmur darker theories, suggestions of visible signs in his face, as if a force invisible would have taken his life in an act of cosmic warning. In the corridors of the city from the Vatican, the confusion was absolute. Centuries-old protocols designed to handle the death of a pontiff became obsolete in the face of Blackout Massive. There was no cameras to transmit the announcement to the world. There were no satellites carrying his image solemn to the faithful. Only candles, shadows, and a faith remained put to the test like never before. The coincidence, or fate, that the death of the Pope would agree with the fall of the electricity woke up ancient fears buried in the awareness collective. In ancient times, it was believed that the departure of a supreme pontiff could be the prelude to changes of apocalyptic dimensions, wars, plagues, breakups of empires, an interregnum not only in the throne of St. Peter, but in he balance same of the world. Meanwhile, in small secret circles, scholars of the more hidden prophecies pointed out with trembling fingers, "This, it was written, and we are just seeing he principle." Death of the shepherd, in the evening without stars, marked something more than the end of a life. It was the echo of a warning that had been sent to us from the remote past, waiting patiently for the moment to become reality. And that moment had arrived. The hours following the blackout were felt endless, as if the time same would have been dragged towards an abyss without background. Europe, the ancient beacon of civilization, had been transformed into a vast landscape of shadows and echoes. From the modern ruins of Paris to the silent banks of the Danube, the entire continent, it seemed, having gone back centuries in a matter of minutes. Without electricity, without communication, without course. The streets, normally teeming with life, now were ghost corridors where the creaking of the steps. It resounded like a shot in the evening. Desperation was not long in coming to emerge. Supermarkets looted by the light of dying lanterns, hospitals forced to choose between whom lived and who died, families whole looking for shelter in churches cold where still were burning a few sturdy candles. The sirens, unable to function, were replaced by human screams, by cries uninterrupted, drilling the dark veil. Governments, powerless, tried to send communications through old shortwave radio systems. Words that achieved cross the ether were fragmented, like messages from a lost age. Keep calm, ration the water, seek shelter. But how keep in calm when even the sun seemed to have given up? In half from the collapse, anonymous figures emerged who refused to succumb. Nurses improvising care in abandoned schools, elderly people transmitting forgotten survival skills, young people touring neighborhoods on foot, delivering blankets and worn-out hopes. They were the new heroes, fighting not only against the outer darkness, but against the even more dangerous shadow that was growing inside every heart, the hopelessness. And in everywhere, the same question was beating in the silence. Is this the principle of the end, or the opportunity for a rebirth? Because when the light goes out, not only reveals the shadows of the world, it also reveals the shadows we carry within. It was not the first time the world faced a night without stars. It was not the first time that ancient scriptures warned of such a devastating sequence of events. Only, in our modern arrogance, we had chosen to bury those knowledge under layers of skepticism and forgetfulness. Between the smoking ruins and the whispers of the radio's old, emerged names that seemed to be taken from another era: Nostradamus, Saint Malachi, the Tiburtine Sibyl, prophets whose words, ignored for centuries, now they came to life like ghosts claiming their place in the present. In his cryptic quatrains, Nostradamus had spoken of a great spiritual leader who would fall while the continent was wrapped in shadows, followed by a winter that would know no dawn. Many they had ridiculed these predictions, attributing them to interpretations forced. But now, who could I continue denying them? The prophecy of St. Malachi, still more specifically, it described a final pope known as Petrus Romanus, who would rule during the final tribulation of the Holy Church, in times where the darkness would spread over the lands of the ancient empires. Interestingly, leaked documents before the collapse suggested that the current Pope's final motto, though never officially revealed, was too closely aligned with this prophetic figure. And in forgotten monasteries of Italy, manuscripts of the Middle Ages narrated an ominous sign: when the artificial lights will be turned off for days and the cities remain silent as graves, would be the announcement of a global purification, where only those prepared in heart and spirit would find the path of the redemption. It was no coincidence. It was no accident. What many they saw it as simple chance, others, in corners of prayer and vigil, recognized it as the silent roar of destiny being fulfilled step by step. Every detail fit in a mosaic that had been painted before centuries: the death of the spiritual leader, the fall of the light, the distress collective. It was as if he past would have stretched out his hand through the fog of the time to finally touch our fragile present. And the question then was not whether the prophecies were real. The question was, what awaited us? Now, after having crossed this threshold, the world had changed, but many still clung to the illusion that somehow everything would be back to how it was before, as if it were enough to turn it on again, the switches, as if the death of a spiritual leader would not have opened a crack in a tissue same as the reality. But for those who they knew how to observe beyond the obvious, it was clear. It was not just a blackout nor an isolated tragedy. It was the beginning of a global metamorphosis, a call unavoidable to face what for centuries we had refused to look. The ancient prophecies did not speak of a sudden end, but of a process, a gradual descent into an inner night that every man and every nation I had to go through. A silent judgment, not imposed by divine punishments, but by the sum of our own decisions, of our indifferences, of our excessive pride. And now, in front of the immensity of the darkness, every human being was faced with its same mirror: what we have really built, what remains of us when the lights go out. Some, consumed by the fear, they fell in selfishness and violence. Others, unexpectedly, discovered a spark of forgotten faith, a sense of community they thought was lost. In the monasteries, the monks did not ask the return of the normality, but the strength to get through the storm. In the streets, those who still could talking about hope became inhuman lighthouses, improvised guardians of a future still uncertain. Because the real threshold was not the material collapse. The real threshold was internal, crossing from the arrogance toward the humility, from oblivion towards memory, from the spiritual death towards a possible resurrection. The prophecies had served their purpose. They had been warnings, maps for times of confusion. Now the map was in our hands, but the path continued dark. And while the first snowfall of the winter fell upon the cities in the darkness, only one thing was certain: the clock there was started to move forward, and it would not stop. Night had settled in the soul of the world, not as a temporary visitor, but as a mirror inescapable of our deepest weaknesses. In middle of the darkness, a new awareness was beginning to wake up, slowly, trembling, like a seed struggling to sprout in land barren. Death del Pastor had not been the end, nor Europe's blackout was just another accident. They were pieces of an ancient puzzle that piece by piece revealed an image we had been afraid to look at, a humanity on the brink of its own transformation. Maybe still is time. Maybe in the midst of this darkness, we can remember the truths we had buried beneath mountains of artificial progress. Perhaps this is the first step towards something purer, more real, more human. But the choice is not in the hands of prophets or leaders who have already left. The choice is up to each of us, because every gesture, every thought, every act of compassion or indifference is shaping now new world that will emerge from the other side of tonight. Are you ready for what's coming? If this story resonated with you, if you felt that a shiver that reminds you that there is still something sacred inside you, then don't let this spark go out. Leave your comment below. We want to know what you think about these prophecies and how you interpret the signs of these times. Share this video. There are people who need to wake up before it's too late. Subscribe to the channel to continue exploring together the secrets, mysteries, and warnings that the history tried to hide us, because the true knowledge not only illuminates, it also transforms. See you in the next mystery.